Boris Johnson will today deliver his two borders for 4 years Brexit plan to replace the controversial Northern Ireland backstop to Brussels. The Prime Minister wants Great Britain to leave the European Union while Northern Ireland remains in a special regulatory relationship with the bloc until 2025. David Frost, his top Europe advisor, will meet negotiating counterparts in Brussels to debrief them on the plans and begin crunch talks. The plan demands that EU leaders drop their demand for a fully open border in Ireland. Under the strategy, Northern Ireland will remain within large parts of the EU's single market until at least 2025. The province will remain aligned to Brussels' rulebook for agri-food and industrial goods standards, but would leave the customs union with the rest of the UK. This essentially would create two borders after the transition period comes to an end after December 2020. There will be a customs border between Northern Ireland and the Republic, but also a regulatory border will emerge between Northern Ireland and the rest of Great Britain. In order to implement the Northern Irish customs border, Mr. Johnson will ask Brussels for a series of derogations from the EU's customs rulebook. Mr. Johnson will suggest that technology, surveillance and trusted trader schemes to ensure that customs checks can be carried out away from the border. EU sources have said businesses would be expected to file electronic pre-clearance customs declarations before shipping across the Irish border. Lorries carrying suspicious goods would be asked to report to designated locations away from the border. Trusted trader schemes and GPS tracking would then be used to monitor goods crossing the border. EU negotiators will question how the threat of smuggling can be eliminated, amid fears that fraudsters could avoid electronic checks or offload suspicious cargo en route to checks. Regulatory standards checks will have to be introduced from goods being shipped from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. Traders will be forced to file their own declarations when transporting goods across the Irish Sea, creating a regulatory border. After 4 years, the Northern Ireland Assembly would be given the choice of whether the province remains aligned to the EU in the future or return to following Britain's new rulebook. The government is planning to strike a free trade agreement with the EU for Great Britain by 2021, which would allow the country to diverge from EU rules. EU sources are unconvinced that the strategy will be acceptable to Brussels, suggesting it raises too many questions over protecting the single market and Good Friday Agreement. In his keynote Conservative conference speech, Mr. Johnson will describe the proposal as a fair and reasonable compromise. He is expected to say, "Voters are desperate for us to focus on their other priorities, what people want, what leavers want, what remainers want, what the whole world wants, is to move on." Jeremy Corbyn wants to turn the whole of 2020, which should be a great year for this country, into the chaos and cacophony of two more referendums. A second referendum on Scottish independence. Even though the people of Scotland were promised that the 2014 vote would be a once-in-a-generation vote, and a second referendum on the EU. Even though we were promised that the 2016 vote would be a once-in-a-generation vote. Mr. Johnson will add, "I am afraid that, after 3.5 years, people are beginning to feel that they are being taken for fools. They are beginning to suspect that there are forces in this country that simply don't want Brexit delivered at all. And if they turn out to be right in that suspicion, then I believe there will be grave consequences for trust and democracy."